All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. We're waiting for a panel member still to join on. He's having some tough technical issues. My name is Troy Tucker. I'm with Blue Sky Business Resources. And welcome to the webinar of Can Your Business Survive Without You? We're really excited and happy to have some outstanding panel members with us today. I'm going to introduce David Stahl. He is a commercial banker, VP of banking, I think, or maybe even higher up the food chain than that at Hillcrest Bank. Guy is very knowledgeable and a great resource. We also have Barry Skull with us, and he is are you a partner, Barry?
Yes, I'm a shareholder at Richards Brandt Miller Nelson.
There you go. So we got Barry with us from the legal aspect. We're waiting on Cliff Forsgren, who is a financial advisor at Mountain
West
Advisors. We also have Amy LaSala with us, who's been on almost every call, but she's very seldom made an appearance. She is a certified valuation analyst and our VP of operations. The idea is to keep this informative, but also conversational. So if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A and we'll get to them as quickly as possible. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to David. We're going to kind of just run through this, and we'll all have thoughts and questions, and please feel free to put yours in there, and we'll get through everything that we can get through. Thank you. With that, David, turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Troy. I appreciate it. This is a welcomed opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about strategic planning in the midst of sort of a pandemic. I think a lot of companies at the moment are just trying to, due to the uncertainty, are wondering what are their next steps. And but according to a survey from the National Center for the Middle Market, which is a great resource for you guys, for any advisors and any companies thinking about options and needing data. 40% of businesses are doing well right now through this pandemic, and so which means many companies should be looking at and exploring options and thinking about the future of their business. 60% of businesses transition to either next generation of family employees or existing management team, which means only 40% transition to a financial buyer. And so what that means is, making sure that you have your operational house in order is important, even if there's economic uncertainty, and trying to figure out what's the next best step for your business and for your shareholders. So right now, most third-party transactions are on hold. And I think a lot of buyers right now are looking at the uncertainty and putting these deals in jeopardy. And I know Troy, you and Amy and Barry could probably weigh in on that front as you guys run deals. But most of them are on hold right now. But that doesn't mean businesses aren't dynamic and they're not transitioning and thinking about their future. So according to the same survey, most investment bankers are optimistic. And I was watching the Bloomberg this morning, and many investment bankers feel the same way, that there's so much dry powder and capital sitting on the sidelines that when things return, probably closer to the end of Q3 and into Q4, the transaction volume is going to be fast and furious. And so, so we should see, transaction activity pick up, which means, most of the entrepreneurs I talk to, they're never ready to sell their business until they get an offer they can't ignore. And so that's why, according to the same survey, the number one problem, and I'll be curious on Barry and Cliff's and Amy's view as well, number one problem affecting the future of business is lack of planning and preparedness. And so that's why, despite some of this economic uncertainty, it's super important for business owners and us as advisors to be surrounding our businesses and helping them thinking about the options and planning for those options. Instituting new changes right now, could be favorable because everybody, most businesses are instituting changes to meet the needs and demands of the new environment, dealing with customers, et cetera. And so now more than ever, there's a heightened sense of meeting with your advisors. Troy, you've done a great job, you and Amy and the team at Blue Sky, in putting together advisory panels and webinars and helping businesses and other advisors think about how to advise their clients. And so, John Brown with the Business Exit Institute based over in Denver suggests that working with an advisor, even amidst this pandemic, can really be helpful for the shareholders in maximizing value. And I know Amy's going to chime in a little bit later about how to maximize value and increase the value of your company and things that you can do. But according to John, 4 things that a company can do right now to be prepared to take advantage of opportunities in the future is cleaning up your business, focusing on the operational improvements, financial accounting, and human capital. I'd be curious on the panel's view in terms of the sort of the impact that human capital has on transaction and value. But, according to John, human capital is one of the most overlooked aspects in any deal. Having the right team around you, and I know that's the biggest thing business owners struggle with, is when to hire and when to relinquish control. But right now, with the labor market as loose as it is, there's plenty of really good talent on the sidelines. And I think business owners need to be looking at opportunities through appropriate planning on up-tiering their talent and focusing on getting the right team around them. So,
hey, David.
Yeah.
We had a guy that we were working with, and he thought that the banks had dried up money and weren't going to be lending as much capital as they were. I want real quickly maybe address that and what Hillcrest's position is on new acquisitions and deal flow. And then I want to make a comment separately about the human capital and the links that Blue Sky is going through to address that as well.
Sure. Yeah. So on the capital front, I don't think I speak for us. We certainly haven't stopped lending. We're definitely, and I think most banks are picking their spots a little more strategically. But I think, I'll call it upmarket in the more financial buyer levered transactions might be a little harder to get the max leverage that most financial buyers were probably accustomed to pre-pandemic. And I think, heading into the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation and rhetoric around sort of the leverage that were on some of these companies' balance sheets, and sort of, in a downturn, because we had 10 straight years of growth, everyone was expecting a recession. Nobody expected it to be, virus driven, but many of these companies were already saddled with debt. And, I think the most notable one that kind of brought this to the forefront was the bankruptcy filing for Toys R Us. And, that really is what started the conversation. That bankruptcy filing happened obviously before COVID, but yeah, I think that's really what brought the forefront of the amount of leverage some of these companies had in these financially orchestrated transactions. And I think that's what banks are really looking closer at, is how much leverage versus equity or debt versus equity are these financial buyers putting into transactions. And so that's where you may see a little shortening. But, right now I'm working with a handful of companies that are looking at strategic acquisitions and other things that just makes good business sense and that are in that 40%. And so we're looking at trying to figure out ways to lean in there and help those companies. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I have a conversation a lot of the times with some of our valuation clients that they have a huge cash balance sitting on the balance sheet, and then they have debt. And I'm like, well, do you have an early payment issue? Are you going to get penalized for early payment on these loans? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, so why aren't you using some of this cash to bring those loan balances down so that during the economic storm and this kind of odd recession, you would have less of a debt payment there? And a lot of them are like, oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, I think some people think about, some business owners think about it in the context of cash is king. And if I've got cash on my balance sheet, a debt is just an obligation that I have to make, and that having that obligation there doesn't impair me. And I'd rather have access to working capital versus just retiring all my debt, because it's hard to regenerate cash sometimes. Yeah. And I also think that, depending on, and I'd be curious on Barry's view relative to this. From my experience, some debt on a balance sheet does actually increase value, because it shows, to a buyer that, this company has gone through and they've got good operational controls, and they've got a bank facility there that's kind of validated that the company performs well, and you may juice out maybe a quarter or another half a turn in terms of your multiple just by having a little bit of, smart debt on the balance sheet. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's kind of funny how people forget about that stuff and don't use it. We've done a lot looking at the failure of acquisition. So it was kind of a recurring theme that we have running in through Blue Sky. And so in looking at it, around 80 to 85% of them all fell because of an acquisition integration or lack of an acquisition integration plan and completely bypassing the culture of the company being acquired. And so, we went out and specifically found a organizational psychologist to help with that. His name's Dr. David Gruder, and that's really why he's here at Blue Sky, is to help us with that and to help, acquiring companies with that acquisition integration. So I think people get really caught up in looking at the finances and the numbers and trying to make sure all that stuff is right, but I think it gets kind of lost in all the rubbish that it's human beings that create those numbers, and if you don't take into account key employees and what they're really after and make sure they don't get on board with the program, you're just kind of throwing money away.
Well, and to what David said earlier about there is a huge talent pool out there right now looking for work, I think that buyers might look at the current employees a little bit differently, because if they already have a management team, they already have, the floor team or whatever that employee census looks like, they already are knowledgeable of the business. They don't have to retrain to bring anybody else in. So that might be a different perspective that buyers are looking at when they're looking at these different companies, of who has that management team, who has that human capital already in place and trained, that I don't have to then look for the talent and bring it in and then bring them up to speed and have that employee training cost.
Well, I also think to the human capital side of things too, everybody brings a unique set of experiences and skills to the team. And most entrepreneurs, when they start a business, they're everything, and relinquishing that control is sometimes a challenge. And a financial buyer is going to come in and I know the title is, this webinar is, can your business survive without you? I mean, that's sort of the spirit of what we're trying to leave our viewers and listeners with, is, that's got to be part of the strategic planning process that I know Barry and Cliff are going to get into. And that's really around making sure that you've surrounded yourself with the right talent that can actually extradite you from the company and allow you to start working on the business. This is a term we use, start working on the business versus in the business. And financial buyers are going to discount you. And Amy, I'm sure you've probably seen this. I mean, they're gonna discount you if you are the business, because as they're buying you, if you're no longer with the business, what kind of business do we actually have here? And so they will, not having the right human capital around you will definitely impair your value in a transaction. So.
Well, and to piggyback on that, if you're the owner and you are the business, that's looking at a much longer transition period to transfer that knowledge over to the new buyer, on top of a potential discount. So you're not exiting tomorrow. It could be a year later with a lower value if you had a management team.
Well, in addition to a sale down the road, if the company is not prepared to lose the owner today, it's not worth anything tomorrow. I mean, Barry and I completed a transaction here earlier this year where the owner was on the right down to making some decisions on what to do, went on a motorcycle ride on Friday and had a heart attack. And fortunately, he survived, but the company was, even if he didn't want to sell, even if we weren't in the middle of a transaction, the company wouldn't have been there for him or for his family. So it's you don't know when your preparation is going to, or lack thereof, is going to show.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of people say the day you buy the business is the day you need to start planning your exit. And to that,
Or the day you start it. Yep.
Yeah, the day you found it, I think.
Yeah,
Well.
absolutely.
Yeah, and just to kind of close out, Troy, on my thoughts here, I won't get into some detail on each particular one, but I think Cliff's point is should resonate well, and really exaggerate why business owners and us as advisors should be forcing our clients to think about this. I know a lot of them don't like to, because it may represent having to face their own mortality, whether that be professional or personal. And that's a hard thing to face. But right now, I think between the low interest rate environment and the low valuations, unfortunately or fortunately, it does create so many opportunities for companies to look at organic growth strategies or inorganic growth strategies. I mean, if a company's doing well and there's a supplier or there's something that could be added to their business, they should look at maybe figuring out ways to bring that one in-house and potentially growing the business and creating more value while the interest rates are low and the investment is sort of less risky. There's as you move up the value chain, there's de-risking strategies that include selling a piece off versus selling the majority off. And we can, I don't know if we'll get into that on this call, but just sort of the advantages and the disadvantages to that from a shareholder perspective. And I know, Barry and Cliff are going to talk a little bit about exiting and transitioning the business. And so I think the big point I want to leave everyone with is, I would challenge everybody to think about who they have surrounding their business externally. This group here represents, a good bit of tax and financial planning, commercial and investment banking, legal advice, insurance. And, I think one that goes overlooked sometimes is a business consultant or a coach. And, sometimes a CEO needs to be held accountable. And the only person that can do that is somebody from outside of the company. And, maybe it's some of the set of advisors, or maybe it's just somebody that they bring in. But I challenge everybody to think about, do our clients, do you as a company have these sort of 5-6 people around you that are challenging you and providing strategic advice as your business continues its sort of growth cycle and kind of where it's going. So, Troy, obviously I'm staying on, but those are kind of the high points I wanted to touch before we turn it over to Barry and Cliff. So.
Absolutely. And I know that a lot of folks here in Utah look at these as cost centers, but I think you got to look at the value proposition that having a team like this around you and what that provides, and the roadmap and strategic growth you can achieve by working with folks like these. And there's certainly an ROI on working with folks like this. Thank you, David, very, very much, man. That was really informative. I really appreciate the detail and the level of information you provided us. So I think we're going with Barry and Cliff next. Is that right?
That would work. Cliff, do you want to start things off, and I'll just weigh in as I can?
Well, Barry and I are going to talk about some of the more granular things. What needs to happen. The thing that we're seeing, and we're talking with business owners now, is, all right, everybody's taken a hit. Everybody's looking for ways to get out. So our view is, and we're hearing from a lot of people, all right, how's my company going to look different a year after we come out of this, and why should it look different? And we're kind of taking the position that, the old Stephen R. Covey, begin with the end in mind. An owner in their 40s or 50s, what do I want to have happen in my company, and what's it going to take to get there? So we look at some very simple steps. Decide where you want to be. What do you need to have that company worth? Because sooner or later you're going to get out of it. Whether you leave it to junior or sell it to a competitor or a strategic buyer, you need to know where you want to be. And in our view, I like to see a valuation done, right up front. It's going to tell you, all right, what's it worth today? So what's the gap between what I need out of it or would like to get out of it and where I am? How am I doing in key areas? How am I doing compared to my peers? And third area is you can identify those strategic areas to start with today to improve your company to build it the way you need it built. Then it comes down to identifying your key people. And it's sometimes you've got to take a hard look at it and say, all right, can this person really fill the role that we need them to fill? And yes or no. And if it's no, can we improve them? Can we help them become the kind of employee they need? Now, these are things that we know need to be done. We don't do them, but we know that they need to be done, which is partly to David's point, having a team or having a group of people that you can count on. And then it just comes down to doing it.
Exactly.
I don't know how many times you talk to an owner who says, you ask them, when are you planning to be out? 3 to 5 years. Well, you come back to them in 5 years and ask the question, you get the same answer.
Right.
Everybody's laughing because everybody's done it.
That's right.
On that front, we used to always ask people, what's your 6-year plan? Because when you ask the canned 3 to 5 years, you get the canned answer. 6 years makes them think about it.
I like that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But it just need to do it. Decide what they want the company to look like, what they need it to look like, what they need to do in order to have their own financial goals and needs met, both from a legacy and a retirement standpoint, and then go do it. And that is, if nothing else, from my perspective, nothing else comes out of this is a commitment to take some action. As one person that I listen to from time to time says, do it, damn it. That's the principle.
I think we heard that just the other day.
I like her.
You know my wife?
I like your wife. That was her saying right away. Cliff, I really like the point that you mentioned of doing the valuation up front. I had worked with a different financial advisory service that they were planning their clients' retirement off of a totally made up number of what the business was worth. And when we started doing some valuations with them, they could actually plug in that real today fair market value number of the business and see how long their retirement funds last or what they can do with that. And like you said, if it's not enough, you can look at the valuation as that strategic tool to guide you in the directions that are going to build value for your company and increase that valuation number, which might not be the things that the business owner would think would grow the value. There's a difference between what they think will build value and what actually will. There's differences there. But then it gives you that realistic picture and can help you and your team build to get the value to where you want it to be when the 6-year exit is.
Thank you, Amy, because that's exactly right. I was speaking with an advisor in another state about a client they had. They had the valuation done, and part of this, you learn where your key performance indicators are relative to your peers, people that are doing what you're doing. And they had 2 in particular where they were significantly below what their peers are. And they just the advisor just simply asked the question, if you could bring those two up to just to average,
Right.
what would it make? What difference would it make in your cash flow?
Right.
And the owner thought about it for a minute, and he says about 10%.
That's huge.
That's huge.
And so the next, yeah, it is.
That's huge.
So the next question is, well, all right, who would be responsible for making that improvement, and what's got to be done or what should be done to make sure that happens? These are the kinds of things you learn from evaluation.
Absolutely.
And the kind
I had one business owner tell me, he said, well, those key performance indicators don't mean anything. Nobody looks at them. And I'm like, really? Go try to get a loan in a bank and have those be way out of whack and see how you do.
You have every buyer running these same metrics on their side, whether if they're going to look at this company to purchase or not. So you better believe everybody is looking at those metrics, but that business owner.
Yeah, but that business owner, right? I mean, go try to get an SBA loan and see what happens, because you're not getting it if you're outside those parameters. And Barry, you've probably had quite a bit of experience with that. But
and as I agree with everything, Stat. I feel fortunate to be among such esteemed and experienced panelists. A non-financial point that attorneys often are required to consider when advising clients is the importance of due diligence when you're doing an assessment of the company, looking at trends in that particular industry and related industries, what kind of risk assessment, projected financials, trend, just general overall trends. Although, as Amy pointed out, I don't think anyone could have predicted a global pandemic, but it is possible to look at an industry and say, wow, I am the equivalent of being a horseshoer in the 20th century. Maybe I need to look at the products or services I'm offering, and are those going to be in demand 5 years or 7 years or 10 years from now? And granted, the crystal ball is imperfect, but I'm surprised at the number of clients I have who said, I just didn't anticipate this major disruption coming. And well, if you'd read in the business press or been following the industry associations for whatever sector you're in, you would have seen this coming. So that idea of being siloed, I think, is very risky and definitely will affect the value of the business. And it's as obvious as things like your intellectual property. Do you have trademarks? Do you have copyrights? Do you have patents or patent applications pending? What's your phone number? Do you have a URL? And all of that contributes to the value of the business. And I'm often just surprised, and not in a good way, that the clients aren't considering these kinds of fundamental issues.
Well, Barry, talking about IP, is it on your balance sheet? Because I've covered so many companies that it's not even on their balance sheet, and that is such a huge asset for what they do. Yeah.
Or just ignoring their ability to obtain copyrights or trademarks that will definitely increase the value of the business. And they think, well, no, that seems complicated. I don't want to be bothered with that. Now, others are very sophisticated and will lock up trademarks related to the service that they provide, with the idea being that that's all source designation. I have one client who has close to 50 trademarks that we keep active, but others just look at it and say, no, I don't think that's going to be vital. All you can do is advise them.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's have you guys seen relative to, you've got your key people, you've got them trained, or you're working on things they need to do. What have you seen as incentives to keep them there? A buyer, as Amy mentioned, is going to want, if you've got good people, they're going to want them there for a while. So, David, what are you seeing? And Troy, and what are people doing to keep their key people engaged and on board?
The most frequent thing that I have seen are stay bonuses for the key personnel, linked to a year or 2 years. I mean, that seems pretty typical from what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen. Oh, go ahead, Troy.
No, go ahead, David.
I was going to say we've seen a few things. Maybe some small equity awards or long-term incentive programs, things of that nature. We've also seen other sort of fringe benefit or incentive programs that kind of create a culture of staying and winning. And I think some of what the owners or shareholder strategy around exiting also plays a factor into that. Around, if you're in the kind of industry that's going to go ESOP, then do you start creating those rewards and incentive programs that kind of lead you towards that? Obviously in a transaction, there's a select few people that you bring in under the tent, and generally they get stay bonuses and other sorts of perks from that perspective to help see the transaction through. But I think in a prior life, we used to have financial literacy and financial well-being programs that we would offer to business owners to deploy to their team, their employees, and it's really just focused around making people financially literate, because all the studies will show that when someone is uncertain and uncomfortable with their own financial picture, productivity declines. Yeah. And so to the extent we were able to help on that side of things, we did, and so those are just a couple of things I've seen.
You're absolutely right, David. In fact, we've got 2 employers now where part of what we're doing is financial literacy. It's interesting though, if we're starting to build, or even the company's been around a while, but the owner is not close to selling or retiring, we're seeing owners looking right now today about how do I keep this person with me? And we're running across some rather ingenious, I guess they're not that ingenious, but plans, because all of us react differently. We've got different things that will stimulate us. This isn't a long-term thing, but I think it's an example of what I'm talking about. I know one business owner set a pretty aggressive goal for a year and told everybody what they would get if the company achieved their goal. And his executive assistant, who he really relied on, came to him and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't want the money." She said, I'd go spend it on paying down our mortgage or this or that or the other. What I would really like, but I will not spend the money on it myself, is a China hutch. And she knew exactly what she wanted. And so if you buy it for me and give it to me, I'll be happy. But if you give me the money to go get it, I'll never go get it.
That is I'm the exact same way. I ended up getting a vacation and taking my kids to Disney for a week as an incentive. And that I would have never spent the money on it, but it was the greatest thing ever. We had such a great time.
We saw another one where they went to this fellow and he said, "All right, if you're still here at this point, there'll be college tuition for your son."
That's a good one.
That's a good incentive. That's a really good one.
Well, but you've got to know your people well enough.
That's right.
To know what's going to keep them.
Yeah.
I did one deal and the owner was very insistent that the new buyers give equity to the employees upon purchase of the company. And the buyers wanted it bad enough that they did that. They acquiesced and gave 10% equity to the employees upon purchase. I've since learned that they actually sold the entire company to the employees since that acquisition, which is great. They definitely didn't have to worry about losing key employees because now they had ownership.
Yeah,
we had a client that we were working with in Florida. It's they're in the distribution business, and the bank I worked for at the time did did a levered ESOP transaction to transition the business to all the employees. 30 years later, when now, here I am and a few new people, they still gave us hugs every time we went in, because we, the people we sold the business to and helped finance 30 years ago were now all worth, they're all millionaires now. And they'll forever be indebted, because as the company, because when you create that ownership culture and everyone thinks like an owner, the whole business, just improves, and you got everybody in the same boat, sort of rowing in the same direction. And, the company had probably approached $1 billion in sales, $50 million of EBITDA. And so it was just a great story. And, it's just, but those are the reasons why you need to, us as advisors and business owners always need to be thinking about this, because you never know where it's going to go, and you never know. You always got to be ready. You always have to be opportunistic. So
absolutely.
And I think ESOPs work really well in bigger, more profitable companies where the employee base is more professional. Although even there, and I'm curious, your experience, David, is that there's a lot of education involved for employees. As soon as you tell them that the company will no longer be contributing to a 401k, for example, there's often a moment of panic on their part. But the ESOPs that I've been involved in have been more mature companies with a larger workforce. And as long as the company took the required time to educate the workforce and the participants, I think they've worked well. I had one where there was a whole lot of anxiety, and I suspect by now a lot of that has passed. And for that reason, I really like LTIPs, and you mentioned that. They work well in smaller companies. They provide incentive, and all the studies that I've seen have supported the thought that they really do encourage employee loyalty and longevity.
I'm in the middle of doing evaluation for an ESOP right now. I have a couple going on, actually. They've grown during the pandemic, but they are a injection molder, and they have a super high turnover rate for people on the floor. And they're hoping that by flipping this to an ESOP, it's going to retain more of those employees and bring down that turnover hiring costs, and be overall better for all the employees, because they'll want to stay because they have part ownership. But it's not an educated level that's turning over. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for them.
The instance I had was an engineering company, and they opened it to all full-time employees, and the senior people, although they still had a lot of questions, and I think it just has to be a safe place where the only stupid question is the one they don't ask. But there was a lot of educating involved, and as soon as they grasped it, they were all very excited. In the other instance, as with your injection molder, the employees were, and I really do think that the key issue was, well, wait a minute, the company's not going to be contributing to my 401k anymore. So, well, you're going to become an owner. You need to kind of change your mindset. But that was, at least initially, only partially an accepted message.
Yeah.
Got a question here. It says, who or what is the right resource to turn to begin to systematize your company to survive without you? That's a great question. I know at our company, at Blue Sky Business Resources, we actually have a free key opportunity assessment, and it'll actually show those weak areas and where to start working with them on. We have some consulting powers to help with that. I think a fractional CFO, if you don't have a CFO, could help with something like that. And other resources like that, consulting groups that can help you put in processes and systems. It starts with getting all your systems really written down, right, or written down, and then that way, people can look at your written processes and they can follow that upon an acquisition. And if you've got management in place and they're familiar with the processes and they're working and they're following those, I mean, you got to start in those small areas and taking those baby steps as they make sense to take. That's my opinion on it, although I don't speak good English or something like that.
Yeah, Troy, I was going to say, I think the advice is right around your strategic consultants. I mean, they're going to come in and take a top-down approach, look at all systems, look at all processes, from financial to operational to working capital, and be able to sort of challenge the owner, the shareholder, the CEO, if you will, on all facets of that, is assuming they're open-minded. I think having good advisors like the folks on this group here, are also well qualified and equipped to sort of help people think about the specific aspects of our expertise. Like, I'm never going to advise anyone on HR, compliance, or other sort of structural elements relative to their business. That's Barry's job. Tax advice, that's in financial planning, that's Cliff's job. What I'll come in and talk about is working capital, operational efficiencies, cash cycle, how quick the dollar turns, and try to leverage that into operational efficiencies for businesses. But sometimes I think we all get a stigma too of being a little bit of self-serving, and so that's why I think the best person to start with is the consultant, because then they can, they're looking at it, generally from a fresh set of eyes. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage everybody to pimp all the free consultants, your banker, your financial advisor, and those guys are already getting paid and, to work with you. And so you can pimp them for free information. One of the least understood concepts in an M&A transaction is working capital. It is the number one thing we struggle with on every transaction. Owners don't understand this concept, and bankers live by the working capital concept. And it's just, I don't know if there's enough education that could be taught about working capital, and I just don't think people can hear it enough personally.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's just brutal. Every client we bring in, one of the first conversations we have is about working capital adjustments at closing. And then we have multiple conversations about working capital. And then we get an offer and we have another conversation about working capital. And then we get to closing and they're like, what's this working capital adjustment? I'm like, oh, I don't know.
I was going to say,
right? It's like we were speaking Hebrew the whole time and all they could understand was Latin. And, we're just totally not communicating on any level. It's just crazy. So anyway, sorry I went off on a rant there. Apologize. It's a little pet peeve of mine.
No. I mean, we used to, I think, one of the things we used to do is focus on just sort of, I tell people, the best advice I can give you is try to talk you out. If somebody's coming to me and they say they need a loan, best advice I can give you is try to talk you out of why you need it, and sometimes if you just focus on, how fast are you collecting versus how fast you're paying, and you see that there's an inversion there, usually people are paying faster than they're collecting. And if we can flip that working capital cycle, to the opposite, and you can collect faster than you can pay, then what you've done is you've released free cash into your business. Now, based on that, sort of anecdotal free cash, now let's take a look at sort of what industry multiples are for your particular segment. And let's show, just by releasing this amount times this multiple, now look at the increase in value. And then the better you can do this, exponentially, you're increasing your value that much. And it was great to kind of go in and do those reviews every 6 months, because what we could see is, the difference it was having. 6 months ago, this is where you're at. 6 months ago, today, this is where you're at, and being able to build upon that. And I think sometimes it's at least I know for me, moving to a new market, I think sometimes it's been a challenge because people think of bankers as someone who just lends money, and I do a little bit more than that. So
yes.
Well, that's a good point, though, of monitoring it every 6 months, because usually when they get to us, they're ready to sell and they don't want to make any changes. So if usually we have like a 6-month period before we're getting signed LOIs from the buyer where you can make some of those changes and start to see that working capital move down. But if we can't, then we have to negotiate with the buyer and tell them, well, this is why our working capital is high, but it really should be here, and you should just trust us, or whatever our pitch pitches, but it's not proven at that point. So at that point, if we get a lower peg, you know, you're just getting the dollar for dollar exchange at closing. You're not getting the multiple like you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think some of that will inform, you know, I think Barry mentioned it, is around, or it might have been Cliff, but it's just around having this realistic expectation of what your business is actually worth. Right. And sometimes, and I'm sure every one of you have seen this, and I'm sure some of our attendees have seen this too. You get into a transaction and the owner has unrealistic expectations. They get fixated on a number, and when the offer comes in and it's, you know, considerably less, you know, they're not happy with it, and just, you know, then the gap is too wide at that point, and they can never get close enough because there's a number in mind, and generally it's because it's not informed through proper planning over years. It's informed by the fact that this is what I need to retire, and I'm not taking anything less.
Yeah.
Or even worse than that, my buddy got 5x on his business.
Yeah.
Why aren't I getting 5x?
And on a different multiple. I love that one.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
What
And,
brings us to the.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Barry.
Go ahead.
Brings the point that has come up a couple of times, and David just mentioned. If you have to, you can clean up a lot of stuff in 6 months, but you're not going to build any value.
Right.
And so you start that several years earlier.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, 1 year is a blip in a transaction kind of environment. 2 years is a trend, and 3 is a strong trend. So you really, you know, you need those trends if you want the money out of them. That's for sure.
Right. I will say though that among the pandemic information that's been going on, NACVA, who I'm the certified valuation analyst through, was hosting. They've done two. What's it called? 2 webinars, we'll call them that because I can't think of the word, where they hosted other valuation designations from across the world to come and talk about, with all this uncertainty and dips in revenue, how are we going to be valuing these companies now? And the majority of them agreed that a discounted cash flow method is where we're going to be able to do that. So we're going to take your 5-year projections, you're going to model your dip in revenue and when you think you can start coming back to normal, and use that in the discounted cash flow. But it's interesting that none of them have any idea, none of them agree on any way that this is going to recover, a time or the shape of the curve. So it's interesting to see that that's the method that they think should be used when, how do you model your recovery if we're all uncertain on it?
Mm-hmm.
But another thing they did all agree with, that if you have to sell your business right now, today, in this environment, you're probably looking at a 10 to 15% haircut off of the value right now because of the uncertainty. However, that the caveat to that is, are you in a business that's been doing really well? Are you in a business that could easily be integrated into a larger company? So there are caveats to that, but we are seeing, you know, a decent haircut off of valuations right now. But if you, after listening to us, can take some of this advice and start sitting down with your advisors, do your valuation now, see where the opportunity areas are for you, and start working on those so that when the market does turn, you can be one of those first companies to market. You will have all your ducks in a row. You will look outstanding compared to the other businesses. So when these private equity groups who look at 500 businesses a year, they're going to pick yours off the top of the pile and pursue that because you have your management team in place. Your margins look good. You're benchmarking with your peers. You have all your stuff ready to go. You're going to be one of the first ones scooped up.
Right.
Well, not to get too exotic, but if you're one of those 40% of those businesses that have survived this well, and you've got the stomach and fortitude to take on a acquisition, now's the right time to be doing an EBITDA arbitrage strategy, right? I mean, it's, you know, you're buying low interest rates, you've got, you know, low valuations, you know, you can inorganically supplement your business And as you're riding the wave up and increasing the value and synergizing the rest of these businesses into yours, you've now created significant value in your business that could ultimately be flipped or exited or de-risked, 3 years from now as the recovery kind of becomes the tailwind. So,
Yeah.
Right.
The deals I see that aren't on hold are mostly smaller businesses, closely held, and are in industries that are benefiting. So in that 40%, home remodeling, construction, landscaping, those kinds of transactions. They're not the big deals. They're not the multi-million-dollar deals, but they're the deals that do seem to be proceeding. And I think it's because buyers feel comfortable with, okay, there's a synergy in buying a competing landscaping company and picking up their client list and their trucks and their equipment and their contracts. I'm curious what the rest of you are seeing as far as which deals are on hold and which seem to be proceeding.
We've been working a bunch of ESOP deals, and they seem to be moving forward. And these deals were kind of stalled out, and the business owners see this opportunity to sell to the ESOP and then manage. One of the huge advantages to the ESOP is the money that you earn doesn't get taxed because it sits basically in a qualified, retirement program now. And so there's just tremendous tax advantages. And so we had some companies that were stalled out, and now they're going down the ESOP road. So the transaction's still happening. From our perspective, we've got a company that's working in an essential space, basically, and that's still moving forward. And there's a welding supply service company that goes along with that they're purchasing, and that guy didn't slow down at all. Our construction company didn't slow down at all. And so, typical, I've had a lot of conversations over the last month or so. And one of them was with a guy who's in the brewing industry, but his primary customers were cruise lines and hotels because he was private labeling beer. And so he saw a dip, right? He wasn't diversified enough. Great little business too. And then we had a couple travel companies. One guy was doing 70 million and 90% of his revenue went away. That's painful. 90% of $70 million gone. And that guy's just holding on. The other guy was also a travel company, and he saw the similar thing, 90% of his revenue, but I think he's well positioned, and he's looking to go out and start acquiring these companies that are going to start falling through the cracks, because you can only survive for so long without any revenue. So, I think that, to David's point, this is a great time to be opportunistic and grow and pick up, you're going to pick up market share for pennies on the dollars right now, depending upon your industry. And this is a great time to make those acquisitions because access to capital is still there. The banks are still lending, and it's cheap money. Oh my God, it's cheap money.
No, Troy. We banks try to put floors in our variable rate deals,
Right.
So we limit the cheap.
There you go. Well, especially in those ones that are scary, right? You got to do that. So that's pretty interesting. Any other? We're getting close to the top of the hour. We got a few minutes left. I'm just going to start with Amy and see if she's got any final thoughts. And if you guys have any questions, please put them into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll get to them. Amy, any final thoughts as we get ready to end?
I'm going to shamelessly plug myself in that a lot of everything we've talked about today starts with doing your valuation and gives you a lot of options, and you could go a lot of different directions, but that's really a great place to start.
I agree. There's a lot of fear and trepidation about valuation. Valuation doesn't mean you're selling. There's no commitment to sell your business if you get a valuation done. I don't know how you know what the scorecard is until you look at it.
Right.
And so we've really designed our valuation to be a strategic business tool, to be totally honest with everybody, right? So you can use it to actually grow your company. That, in conjunction with balance sheets and P&L statements, is going to make a huge difference, has the potential to. David, any final parting questions or thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm not going to do a shameless plug for me, but I will do a shameless plug, around sort of from a banker perspective. I would, if your banker is not having these conversations with you, then you should find another banker, because, we're, other than probably Barry's seat and a CPA seat, I mean, we play a pivotal role in advising clients around capital structures and what's the right amount of debt, and, the financing strategies for some of these things. And, if your banker is only limiting it to, hey, I can help you with that, then, you don't have the right banker around you. So
I'll do a shameless plug for David. He's one of the best bankers I've had the privilege of working with, and is well-rounded in his knowledge. So reach out to David Stahl and talk to him. The guy has a wealth of knowledge. Barry?
I'll defer to Cliff. I think I've talked enough. Cliff, do you want to do a summation?
Nice job, Barry.
Nothing like passing the baton, right?
That's right.
I think whether you're looking to sell or build and grow, the three most important items are preparation, preparation, and preparation. And you've got to know where you want to be and what you need to do to get there. David mentioned earlier that you got some owners that I need this much to retire, so I'm not going to sell for any less than that. Well, he's too late in determining what he needs. He should have started 3 to 5 years earlier. And that's the thing we see time and time and time again.
Funny how 3 to 5 years sneaks by so fast. I'm also going to do a shameless plug for Cliff Forsgren. He's one of the most well-spoken financial advisors I've come across. He knows what he's talking about. He has his client's interest at heart, and will always do the best that he can for his clients. So, and I know Barry works for a very reputable firm, and he comes really well recommended from Cliff. I'm going to actually start engaging Barry to do some work for Blue Sky, I think. So please feel free to reach out to any of these guys. This is a wealth of knowledge. And I appreciate everybody being here and taking the time to speak to everybody this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
Troy is the brain trust behind this.
Oh no, Amy is. Amy is. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.